Awesome. So thanks to you all so much for coming. It's near the end of the conference and right after lunch, so we appreciate it. Thanks to Matt for chairing. Thanks to Andrew for his awesome and really thoughtful comments. And I think there should be plenty of handouts, but just in case, the handout is also on the app, or if you just prefer digital, so you can also find it there. Okay, so I'm just going to jump in because I don't want to go too much over. So our argument today centrally revolves around cases like the following, which this is on your handout. We call it Taylor the Akrasia. So Taylor believes that her close family and her close friends and family think ill of her. She knows this is an irrational thing for her to believe, especially since she knows that her only apparent evidence for this is that she and they have been speaking less lately. This lack of communication, she admits to herself, is easily and plausibly explained by the fact that she has just moved to a new country to start a demanding job. Still, she believes that her family and friends think ill of her, despite her low confidence that this is true. And so, what we want to do today is we want to argue that cases like Taylor's, in which an agent believes P and has a low credence in P, exemplifying a certain kind of epistemic akrasia, support a specific view about the relationship between belief and credence. So before we get into that, I want to just go over a little bit of background about belief and credence. So belief is a familiar attitude. It's often taken to be a coarse-grained attitude where there are sort of three belief-like attitudes we can take towards a proposition. We can believe it, we can withhold it on it, or we can disbelieve it. But we're also, more confident in some of our beliefs than in others. So I'm more confident that 1 + 1 = 2 than that, my flight is at 12:30 tomorrow, even though I believe both things. And so for this reason, some people, epistemologists appeal to a second attitude called credence. So credences are a more fine-grained attitude. They're similar to levels of confidence. So, maybe I have credence of 1, that 1 + 1 = 2, but credence 0.9 that my flight is at 12:30 tomorrow. So this sort of enables us to represent our attitudes towards propositions in a more fine-grained way. And credences are often correlated with subjective probabilities. So we have beliefs, where there's 3 belief-like attitudes. We have credences, where there's, in principle, an infinite number of attitudes you could take towards a proposition. And this raises a question, how do these two attitudes relate to each other? So there's 3 main views on the relationship between belief and credence. The first is a credence-first view, and on a credence-first view, credences are more fundamental, and beliefs are a species of credence. So belief is either credence 1 or maximal credence, or belief is credence above some threshold, maybe less than 1, but maybe above 0.5. So toy version, you believe everything, you have at least a 0.75 credence in. That's just one version. You could put the threshold somewhere else or even have a threshold that varies with stakes. But the idea is that credences are more fundamental, and we can understand beliefs in terms of credences, beliefs fully reduced to credences. The second view is a belief-first view, and on this view, beliefs are more fundamental, and credences are a species of belief. So you might think, well, when I say I have a 0.9 credence that my flight is at 12:30 tomorrow, all that is just a full belief, and that belief has the content. The probability that my flight is at 12:30 tomorrow is 0.9. You could also think that they're not always about probabilities, but they're about epistemic modals more generally. So I might instead believe my flight is probably at 12:30 tomorrow, or it's likely that my flight is at 12:30 tomorrow, or it's unlikely that it's going to rain today. But the important part about the belief-first view is that the sort of fine-grained or numerical component of the mental state is built into the content rather than the attitude, and the attitude is just simply that of belief. And we've cited a number of people who defend both of these views on your handout, but there's others as well. So the third view is called dualism. And dualism is the view that belief and credence are equally fundamental, and neither reduces to the other. So belief is not credence above some threshold, credences are not beliefs about probabilities, but we sort of have these two mental states, and we can't reduce one to the other. And so what we want to argue today in this talk is that examples like Taylor the Akrasia support belief-credence dualism over the credence-first view and over the belief-first view. So if you buy into the possibility of cases like Taylor's, then you're going to have good reason to be a dualist. Why think that? Well, there's 3 main reasons. We think dualism best explains the attitudinal structure of Taylor's case, why Taylor's case is an akrasia one, and the datum that Taylor has a belief and a credence with the same content. So our main strategy today is going to be kind of trying to show how the possibility of cases like Taylor's make trouble for the other views. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to briefly explain how Taylor's case presents a difficulty for the belief first view, but we're kind of a little more focused on the credence first view today, so that's just going to be really brief. Then Peter's going to talk a lot more about the credence first view, then we're going to present an objection on behalf of the credence first view, and then respond to that. Okay, so that's a little bit of background and intro. Now let's jump into section 2. So I'm going to begin section 2 by just explaining the basic tenets of the belief first view in more detail. So on the belief first view, credences are beliefs whose content contains a probability or an epistemic modal. So a 0.99 credence that it's raining is just a belief. That belief has the content. The probability that it's raining is 0.99. And a high credence that it's raining is a belief that it is probably raining, where probably picks out an epistemic modal. So again, a sort of like interesting work that sort of the fine-grainedness or numericalness of the credence is built into the content of what's believed. And there's only one simple attitude, belief. So we think that Taylor's case presents a problem for the belief first view because it can't capture what we think to be an obvious feature of cases like Taylor's. And we take a datum of cases like Taylor's to be that Taylor has a belief and a credence that have the same content. And the dualist view and the credence first view can explain this. So dualists are explicit that this is possible. You can have a belief that P and a credence that P. The attitudes are independent, so you can hold a belief towards P and a credence towards P, and that there's nothing really funky going on there, and most dualists explicitly say this. For the credence first view, every proposition whose credence is above some threshold is also a belief. So let's say the threshold is 0.75, every proposition that I have at least a 0.75 credence in, I also believe. So I can have a belief towards P and a credence towards P. But the problem for the belief first view is that it forces sort of an unnatural and we think odd reading of this case. And it's not that you have two attitudes towards the same content. Rather, you have two beliefs towards different propositions. Taylor believes P, her family and friends think ill of her, and then she has another belief with a different content, that the probability of P is low. And we think it's kind of weird that you can't form a credence in a believed proposition. But we think introspective evidence tells us that this is possible. So Andrew says, I think the Lakers are going to win the game tonight. And I'm like, how confident are you? And he's like, I'm pretty confident. And we think what he's doing is he's forming another attitude towards the proposition the Lakers are going to win tonight. He's not forming a new belief with a more complex content. So we think, look, dualists and credence firsters can explain how you can have a belief and a credence with the same content. But on the belief first view, you have one attitude and they have different content. And so we think this is a cost to the belief first view that Taylor's case kind of illuminates. So now I'm going to turn it over to Peter. So he's going to explain how Taylor's case counts against the credence first view.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. So let me sort of shift gears and talk about how we think cases of epistemic akrasia give us an argument against credence first views. So again, we can sort of broadly gloss credence first views as those that say credences are, or beliefs are credences above a certain threshold, or they're maximal credences. But in fact, I think maybe we want to distinguish these. Some of the arguments in the literature against the credence first view are sort of more directly targeted only at views on which belief is maximal credence. But we think an interesting feature of our arguments is that the arguments that akrasia generates apply both to views on which belief is maximal credence and views on which belief is just threshold passing credence. Okay, so let's focus on just this simple gloss of the credence first view. And I want to suggest that in cases of akrasia where you believe something even though you believe you shouldn't, or more, as we've described it, you believe something even though you also have a little confidence in its truth. There's two problems for credence first views. First, if you have a view on which beliefs just are credences, you end up miscounting how many attitudes there are in cases of akrasia. And secondly, you end up not being able to have the judgment that cases of akrasia actually are akratic at all. So let me just start with the first case. So again, think of this, the sort of state we're all familiar with. You think, oh gosh, this, this thing really just seems true, even though I know it's really unlikely to be true. Well, if beliefs are credences, then you believe a proposition if and only if you have a threshold passing credence in it. But we take it to be a core part of cases of akrasia that you don't have a threshold passing credence in it. Again, you can ask someone who's in an akratic state, oh, you believe that your family friends hate you? Yeah, I guess. I mean, it just seemed like, yeah, okay, well, how confident are you? Well, I know it's really unlikely to be true, but I believe it anyways. Given that in cases like Taylor's, where she's believing something akratically, despite her low confidence, it just seems like she doesn't have a threshold passing credence. That just seems to be part of what the data is, what the data are. But if beliefs are threshold passing credences, then just follows that in cases of akrasia, you just don't believe the thing that you are alleged to believe. It seems like a pretty big problem, given that, paradigmatically cases of akrasia are, you think P is, you believe P anyways, even though you believe it's not likely. There is no place for this believing it anyways to come in. This brings up the second problem, which is that if it's not even true that Taylor or an epistemic akratic believes the proposition anyways, then it's really hard to see why their epistemic state would constitute a lapse in epistemic rationality. If all you have is this low credence and you don't have this other thing, the belief anyways, then it seems hard to recover the idea that there's any conflict in your epistemic states. But paradigmatically, akrasia is a case of having a conflict in your epistemic states. Here's another way we might gloss it. I take it that a very plausible way, a very common way to describe akrasia is that you believe a proposition even though you have a defeater for it. But suppose you don't even believe the proposition. All you have is a low credence in it. Well, in order to, if you don't even believe the thing, then it doesn't seem like you have this description at all. There's nothing that serves as a defeater for another. So in order to recover the paradigmatic, or the really plausible characterization of akrasia as you believe something even though you know you have a defeater for it, it seems like we should at least countenance that Taylor and other cases of epistemic akrasia involve two separate things, namely the low credence and the believing it anyways. Now, you might say, okay, well, if her low credence just is her belief, maybe we can still recover the sort of core judgments about akrasia that we want to recover. For instance, maybe we can say that, oh, she has a low credence, but she was weighing the credence. All she has is a low credence, but maybe in some way the credence is a defeater for itself. We think this is really unlikely. I mean, maybe there are cases in which a belief can be a defeater for itself, like maybe if you believe a contradiction. But this doesn't seem like one of those. This seems like if there ever are cases where you have a belief that's a defeater for itself, this isn't one of them. And so we think if you have a view, to sum up, on which credence is fundamental and beliefs just are credences above a certain threshold, you end up not being able to say in any plausible way that Taylor believes the thing anyways. And because you can't say that, it looks like you're going to have a real hard time recovering the judgment that that cases of akrasia are in fact a lapse in epistemic rationality. So that's our argument against the credence first view. I'm going to hand it back to Liz for a quick introduction of an objection.
Great, thanks so much. So now we're on section 4, an objection and replies. So I think we're on the second page of your handout. Maybe we have been for a while. Again, I have a different secret handout, so I don't remember exactly where your handout's laid out. Okay, so you might give the following objection on behalf of the credence first view, and that's this. Well, look, in cases like Taylor's, Taylor at the same time has a high credence in P and has a low credence in P. So in these cases, Taylor believes P, has a high credence in P, and has a low credence in P, and Taylor's belief is constituted by her high credence. But she also simultaneously has this low credence in P. Okay, so that's like a gloss or a reading that a credence firster might try to give to recover the idea that belief reduces to high credence. She has the high credence, but she also has the low credence. They both have the same content, P. So we have three responses to this objection. I'm going to explain the first, and then Peter's going to explain the second and the third. Okay, so our first response is this, that it's psychologically impossible, or at least super weird, to have two credences with the same content at the same time. So you might say, well, look, like, we think we can believe contradictions. Maybe you can't believe P and not P, but you can believe P and believe not P. So why can't you have like a high credence in P and a low credence in P? Well, I think that the case of believing a contradiction is importantly different than this case, because in that case, you have two beliefs that have different contents. One belief is towards P, one belief is towards not P. But the credence firster, based on cases like Taylor's, is forced to commit to something even more radical. So same attitude type, same content, different attitude token. And we just think that's pretty weird. So we think we might have grounds to claim that that's actually just impossible. You just can't be in that state even if you're irrational. People in the literature aren't really talking about this kind of state. So it'd be interesting to hear your feedback on whether you think this is possible. But even if you think it's possible, we also think it's just really weird, and it's a big cost to the credence first view to have to kind of give this reading for all of these cases like Taylor's, where you have a belief but a low credence. So we think either it's impossible, whereas so then the credence firster can't give this reading, or they're going to be forced into an awkward position where they have to give this reading for all of these cases of akrasia and any case where you believe something with a low credence, and we think that that's also costly. So either way, that's kind of a problem for them. Or at least it gives you a reason to prefer dualism, which is our more modest thesis. So go ahead, Peter, with the other two responses.
Awesome. Okay. So yeah, again, this objection is sort of on behalf of the credence first view.
Oh yeah, I should have said that.
Sorry. Where we've said, hey, look, the credence first view seems to misjudge how many attitudes there are in cases of akrasia. If that's the case, then they can't recover that. They even are cases of akrasia. The second response sort of looks at the objection sort of from what the credence first view would say about it. I mean, so suppose you do really have two different credences, one high, one low, in the same proposition. Well, if you're a credence firster, then you think that this is just going to be a case of not believing something even though you think you shouldn't. This will be just a case of believing P and believing not P. That's just what the credence first view is, or would judge of this sort of case. So even if it's possible, this seems still to get the fact that this is a case of epistemic akrasia wrong. And I say this just because cases of akrasia aren't cases of believing a contradiction. Maybe there are cases of akrasia where you believe a contradiction even though you know you shouldn't, but that's not what's being proposed here. What's being proposed here is that you believe P and you believe not P, and one of those is the thing that you say to yourself you're not supposed to believe. But that just doesn't seem like the right characterization of akrasia. I mean, if you were to believe in a contradiction in this way, that certainly would be a lapse in epistemic rationality. But the sort of norms of epistemic rationality would, unlike in cases of akrasia, be exerted against sort of the fact that you're believing a contradiction. Rather than in cases of akrasia, we take it, the norms of epistemic rationality are that you're believing a particular thing that you're not supposed to, rather than holding a set of beliefs that you're not supposed to. So that's sort of one reason to think that this objection, even if it were possible, wouldn't capture correctly what we want out of cases of epistemic akrasia. The last response to the objection I want to consider is just that, look, even if there turned out to be a satisfactory credence only or credence first reading of cases of akrasia, we think that belief-credence dualism still provides a better account of why the sort of phenomenological experience of akrasia is what it is. Here's two features of epistemic akrasia I want to call attention to. When you believe something acratically, first it seems like what your attitude is flat out belief. Doesn't seem to be graded in any way. Secondly, maybe this is just the same way of saying the same thing, but when you believe something acratically, the acratically held belief isn't sensitive to changes in credence or to changes in the sort of evidence that's relevant to credence. So here we're thinking about probabilistic evidence. Dualism seems to provide a really good account of why both of these features obtain. So when you believe something acratically, I take it that the felt character, the sort of subjective phenomenology of what's going on, is that you just can't shake it. And someone asks you, oh, how confident are you in it? And you might well say, I'm not confident at all. That's why it's a case of akrasia. But then you still can't shake the belief at all, even if you sort of agree that you have this other thing, confidence level in the belief. The fact that you can't shake the belief seems to suggest that it is its own attitude, and belief is typically taken to, and just got a paper on this, to just be something flat out, right?
Beliefs don't come in degrees.
Yeah. So that's a way in which we think dualism captures better the first sort of subjective phenomenology that's the way in which we think the dualist picture better captures the first aspect, and also the second aspect seems to come along right alongside it as well. If someone shows you a bunch of evidence saying that your family and friends don't actually hate you, if they show you a bunch of statistics on most people's family and friends actually are quite fond of them, that's why they're friends with you, you still don't walk away with this feeling, I'm gonna lower my belief now. You still can't shake it. So again, it seems like dualism, where we just countenance that there's this separate attitude type belief and it's just all out. That seems to better explain the subjective character of akrasia. Lastly, I want to note that if we endorse dualism as an account of what's happening in epistemic akrasia, we do get a better account, or an account of the relationship between belief and credence that helps unify cases of akrasia with other cases of the relationship between belief and credence that have been discussed in the literature. So for instance, this following sort of case has come up a lot in recent literature on probabilistic evidence. So suppose you see a blue bus hit a pedestrian, and there's only one company in the city that drives blue buses, the blue bus company. And you say, okay, I believe that the blue bus company hit a pedestrian. And then later on, you learn that, as a matter of fact, the blue bus company only operates 5% of the 5% of the buses in the city. Now, it seems like on account of that evidence, you ought to lower your confidence level in what you saw. But it seems epistemically rational still to maintain the belief that you had. And this is a case a lot of people think of it being clear that belief comes apart from credence and the sort of evidence that's relevant to credence. And it turns out that this is the same sort of case that we think happens with akrasia. You have a belief, and then you have this other thing, a confidence level, and the belief isn't sensitive to changes in the confidence level, and the belief also isn't sensitive to the sort of evidence that should rationally affect your confidence level. Obviously, there's a difference in which attitude in these particular cases we're going to judge to be the epistemically rational one, but in terms of the structure of the cases at least, and in terms of the sort of relationship between what's held fixed and what's sensitive to evidence, we think that dualism provides a really satisfactory unification with these pre-existing sort of dualistic type examples. So all in all, I think there's really good reasons to accept belief-credence dualism given cases of akrasia. We've responded to one objection, and we think that there's a really plausible picture to be had. Thanks a lot.
I have a handout, so
He gave us 2.
Oh, nice.
Hello, everybody. How are y'all? Yeah, hope you had a good lunch. Okay, so I'm thankful for this opportunity to comment on Liz and Peter's paper. Before I begin, I'll explain some fun background. You see, Liz and I have co-written a paper defending the belief-first view. We worked really hard on it, presenting arguments for it and responding to the main objections to it. So it's really nice to have her as an ally. But now she's no longer an ally. She's co-writing a paper and attacking the belief-first view with another person, Peter. So with that said, I really welcome the criticisms of the belief-first view from Liz and Peter, and they've helped me further my thinking about it. So just to be clear, so I hold to a belief-first view. Liz and Peter hold to a dualist view. It's on my heart to defend the belief-first view, but before I do that, I'm going to make a few remarks on behalf of the credence-firster. So let's start there. So this is on the front, it should say defending credence-first. So if you look at their paper, first Liz and Peter say that the problem with their epistemic akrasia case, what it raises for the credence-first view is first, the credence-first view incorrectly determines the number of attitudes Taylor has. And second, the credence-first view has the false implication that a credence could be a defeater for itself. Okay, but, it's on the handout, I think that the case applies to most credence-first views much more immediately and directly. So let's look again at the case, and you can refer to their handout. It starts out like an ordinary epistemic akrasia case, but they add the following sentence at the end. They write, still, she believes that her friends and family think ill of her, despite her low confidence that it is true. Okay. So at this point, credence-firsters' alarms should be blaring. Many credence-firsters, as they said, think that to believe is just to have a high credence. So many credence-firsters should take this right away to be a direct potential counterexample. And note, it's not the acratic part that's the problem. The credence-firster could reason, yes, here's someone who believes P, but who also believes it's irrational to believe P. That's fine. But slipping in at the end, sneaking in at the end of the story that Taylor believes but also has a low confidence is exactly what many credence-firsters think is impossible. So I think that should be the primary challenge to credence-firsters. Concerns about too many attitudes or defeaters seem to me to be secondary. So is this case a counterexample? So let P be Taylor's family and friends think ill of her. First, at least it's not intuitively obvious that the case is possible. We are saying that Taylor believes that her close friends and family think ill of her. So Taylor believes P. She takes it to be true. She affirms it. But if that's all the case, then it seems inconsistent to then add that she doesn't have high confidence in it. Okay, so what do Liz and Peter say to support the claim that Taylor could have a low credence? Consider this quote. So this is on the handout. After all, Taylor admits, it is unlikely to actually be true that my loved ones think ill of me. This low credence in that proposition is clearly not maximal, nor does it pass the 0.5 threshold. Okay, this quote suggests that they think that Taylor has a low credence that P because Taylor thinks it's unlikely that P. Okay. Now, I feel the pull of this, in fact, because I'm a belief-firster. On my view, to have a low confidence that P just is to believe that P is unlikely. So if you feel that pull, then maybe you should consider whether you should be a belief-firster.
or a dualist.
But most credence-firsters will not accept this. In conversation, when I try to talk about those people, credence-firsters have told me of cases like this, that there's your credence that P, and there's your credence for the proposition that P is unlikely, or your credence for the proposition that P is irrational or not well supported by evidence. So they will thereby likely say, and I think this is on the handout, yeah. They will thereby likely say that Taylor believes P, Taylor has high confidence that P, she believes P is irrational, and she has high confidence that P is irrational. No low confidence that P has to be added to the story. So I'm actually sympathetic to Liz and Peter's reading of the case, but I do not think the intuitions are that clear, and so I don't think they'll be persuasive to the credence first here. Okay, so that's my brief defense of credence first, which none of us hold it. If some of you hold it, then on behalf of you. Okay. Second page of the handout, defending belief first. So let's discuss the belief first view. Now, as I saw it, the fact that Taylor is akratic, meaning she believes P while believing P is irrational, did not seem important for their case against belief first views. So what exactly is the complaint? Now, I think some of their complaints missed the mark. Okay, so I'm going to take a quote from their paper that I think is representative, and I'll comment on it. So here's the quote. They say, oddly then, given belief first, one cannot form a credence in a belief proposition. It seems unnatural to think of Taylor's case as a case of having two beliefs toward different propositions, but the belief first view forces this reading of the case. In contrast, on both the dualist view and the credence first view, one can have both a belief that P and a credence that P at the same time. Okay. So if you look at the first and third sentence of this quote, they indicate that Liz and Peter think the following. 1. Belief first views incorrectly imply that one cannot believe that P and have a credence that P. My reply. Of course, I can both believe that the earth is round and also be confident that the earth is round. As a belief firster, I just think that to be confident that the earth is round is to believe that it's probable that the earth is round. But it's not impossible to believe both that the earth is round and also believe it's probable that the earth is round. So I don't think they should affirm sentence 1. All right. Okay, the second sentence of the quote, this is moving now to the second objection. The second sentence of the quote seems to indicate the following. You look back at the second sentence. They seem to be saying that belief first views incorrectly imply that Taylor believes different propositions. My reply. It's already part of the case that Taylor believes different propositions. That's what makes it an akratic case. He believes that his family thinks ill of him, and he also believes it's an irrational belief. Furthermore, as quoted above, Taylor also has a belief that it's unlikely that his family thinks ill of him. So we must already affirm that Taylor has belief in different propositions. In fact, here I think it's the dualist. The dualist is the one who has to multiply attitudes. For Liz and Peter, the dualists, Taylor believes P, Taylor believes it's unlikely that P, and Taylor has a low credence that P. For a belief firster, like me, Taylor believes P, and his belief that it's unlikely that P and his low credence that P are the same thing. So the belief firster can say there are fewer total attitudes. Fewer at least than what the dualist says. Okay, having said all this, this is the third objection. Here's what I think is the important proposition that Liz and Peter are drawing attention to. And this really bothered me when I read their paper, and I was like, ugh, the crap. This is I feel like at the end of the day, I might have a bullet to bite, but we'll see. Okay, so number 3. Belief first views incorrectly imply that if S has confidence that P, then S's attitude isn't toward or in P. And the reason for this is because on a belief first view, S's attitude is supposed to be toward probably P, not P. Okay? My reply, I say that 3 is false. If S has confidence that P, then I say S has an attitude toward both P and probably P. I think this because I think that if S believes probably P, then S has an attitude toward both P and probably P. When you believe probably P, you have an attitude toward both. So if S believes probably P, the content of S's belief is probably P. But notice that this does not preclude S from also taking an attitude or position on or view about P. S has also taken an attitude toward P by believing that it is probably true, or that P is probably true. And on a belief first view, that's just what it is to be confident that P. Okay. Last point, this is the question here. Liz and Peter might ask, all right, so when someone is confident that P, what is the content of their attitude? Is it P or is it probably P? And like I said before, it'd be both. So I'll just say the belief content is probably P. The confidence content is P. Otherwise, I don't think there's any such single thing that is the content of the attitude. I recognize that this might leave us with more questions, but I think I'm out of time, so I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Oh, do you need this?
Yeah.
That's our notes.
Question.
Oh, wait, no, can we respond?
Okay.
Okay.
No, they don't have to. We can leave it just there.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew, for the really insightful comments. So I'm going to just respond on behalf of the credence first arguments that we gave, and this is going to respond on behalf of the belief, of the anti-belief first arguments that we gave. So right, Andrew has suggested that, if you're a tried and true credence firster, you think credence is the only attitude there is, what you're going to judge is that cases of akrasia, as we've described them, you believe P and you believe that P is unlikely. Those are going to not be possible. In fact, what's going to really be possible is you're going to believe P and you're going to believe P, that is, have high credence in P, and additionally have high credence in the following proposition: P is unlikely, or alternatively have high credence in the proposition P is irrational. Yep. So I think our reply is just that you're still going to end up having a low credence in P. For instance, suppose the credence firster wants to say, okay, you believe P and you have a high credence in the following proposition: P is unlikely. But it seems to us to be the case that if you have a high credence in P's being unlikely, then you just have a low credence that P, or at least you should in the vast majority of cases. And all we need is one case. Yep. So it seems, if what you're assigning credence to is the proposition, if what you're believing in that is assigning high credence to is the proposition that P is unlikely, then you still end up assigning a low credence to P. Alternatively, if you want to say that the credence firster should say, no, you believe that is, you have a high credence in P, and in addition, you assign a high credence to the following proposition: P is irrational. But you want to say, again, you also end up with a low credence in P. And the reason is simply that I don't think we go around willy-nilly assigning judgments of irrationality to certain beliefs. Presumably, the reason why in a case of akrasia you would assign a high credence to the probability to the proposition that P is irrational to believe, presumably you would do that only because you think it is unlikely given the evidence, and that's why it deserves to be called irrational. So in that case, we actually think that you not only still will have a low credence in P, it'll again be the sort of what's fundamental to the case being a case of akrasia. So in either case, it seems to us still to be the case that not only are these cases possible, but even given other readings of them from credence first lights, we can still recover the intuition that the acratic does have a low credence in the proposition.
Cool. So I'm going to respond to what Andrew said about the belief first view, which is funny because I do have another paper with Andrew defending the belief first view. But if any of you guys were in Will's session earlier, what I would say is I endorse the belief first view, but I actually believe the dualist view. But I do think belief first is more plausible than a lot of people think. And I have a higher credence in belief first than credence first. So I'll say that. I think a lot of the current objections to belief first fail. So anyway, you could think I'm doing something on a meta level that's bad, but we can talk about that later. Okay, I just want to focus on Andrew's last remark. So his last remark is this. When someone is confident that P, what is the content of their attitude? Is it P or is it probably P? I would say the belief content is probably P. The confidence content is P. Otherwise, there is no single thing that is the content of the attitude. Okay, I'm actually really worried about this because I think it's blurring the attitude-content distinction in a really problematic way. The whole point of the belief first view was supposed to be look, we have this one simple attitude, and appealing to only this one simple attitude, we can explain all these different degrees of confidence, all these different credence levels, we can reduce all these different mental states to this simple attitude that does have complex content, right? But the point is supposed to be it's a simple attitude, complex content sort of view. And I think a lot of belief firsters, including in me and Andrew's paper, were look, it's this very simple view. It can explain lots of data. That's a really big thing that's supposed to count in favor of the belief first view. And so, given this, I would think the belief firster would want to not say there's no single thing that is the content of the attitude. They would want to say there's one simple attitude belief, and then the content is this kind of more complex thing. So I'm worried about that response, but I think this brings up some interesting issues, so we can talk more about what the belief firster should say about this in Q&A. I did also want to address something that Andrew's comments brought out, and that's the extent to which kind of epistemic akrasia is doing work for us in this paper. So first, we both don't really think it's doing that much work in our arguments against the belief first view at all. We kind of just tucked that in there because we were like, oh, this is sort of an interesting objection. But any case where you can have a belief and a credence with the same content, whether it's akratic or not, that could create a problem for the belief first view. We do think the akrasia is doing some important work in our credence first view, in arguments against the credence first view, given the idea that we don't think that Taylor's attitude can be a defeater for itself. And I also think, too, that there's something to be said about sort of appealing to akrasia to sort of make it more plausible that cases like Taylor's, where you believe something and have a low credence, are possible. Well, yeah, she's akratic. That's what's going on. That's kind of I think that sort of motivates that, yeah, these cases are possible. This is something we do experience. But I don't necessarily, at least I don't think that the heart of our worry might be that you can have cases where you believe something and have a low credence in it. The heart of our worry might not be anyone who thinks akrasia is possible should be a dualist. So I do acknowledge the title might be putting more emphasis on the akrasia than our paper does, but I do think, look, if you think you can believe something and have a low credence in it, even if you're irrational, this does seem to support dualism. So I also just wanted to address that. Okay, I think we're done.
Yeah. So, sorry, I wasn't ready. Okay. No, I'm ready.
You're ready.
So one remark on Andrew's third response, which is what he says there looks almost exactly like what Mark Schroeder says in Being 4.
I didn't know that.
A paper called Two Roles for Proposition, Cause for Divorce, or something like that. At one time
Those are two different papers?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Being 4 is a book.
Okay.
But, I think if you're interested in pursuing whether that objection's successful or not.
Yeah.
But I guess I wanted to ask about whether this judgment that there's the same content, this sort of same content judgment. First you said it as we take it as a datum that there's belief and credence with the same content.
Yeah.
That strikes me as a really shaky way to put it, because credence is a technical term. Credence isn't a term we use in the real world. It's a technical term, and so it's hard for me to take that as a datum.
Okay.
Now, when you started going to confidence, then we're talking.
Okay. Cool.
And then I would wonder about cases it seems like we might describe the case. He thinks P, but he also thinks P is really unlikely or something. That looks like a belief firsty way of describing it. And that's not to say yours is the wrong view of that, but it just looks like there's pressure pushing in each direction from the way we describe these things. And so, do you think the pressure is really stronger on your side, or do you think there's just some ugliness on the description, the connection between descriptions and what's actually going on in our minds?
You want to take
Yeah, sure. So, okay, good question. So I do think, here's where I think the dualist can maybe do better than the belief first view, is that the belief first view is forced to give the reading you just gave of all of these cases of belief and confidence with the same content. So they're forced to say, in every case, you believe P and you believe P is likely to whatever degree, Whereas I think the dualist can say, well, there are cases where you have a belief and you have a belief about the probability, but in other cases, you just believe, you have a belief and you have a confidence level, but you don't necessarily have a belief about a probability or a belief with an epistemic modal. It's a trade-off though, because things do start to look really complex, because we're oh man, you have credences / confidence levels and these probabilistic beliefs and just normal beliefs. Is this all really going on up here? So there is one way of pushing back against dualism is it's so complex, that's crazy. So So I think there's things to be said for both sides there, but I do think there is some kind of an advantage that the dualist has here, whereas the belief firster, unnatural might be a little unfair, but at least it's like it forces a particular reading of all the cases, where the dualist has a lot more readings open to her. So I think that's at least some advantage the dualist has. So I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah. Pretty much covers it.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So I want to come back to whether this case should be accepted as possible by the student's firster.
Okay.
So I totally agreed with Andrew's comments there. I thought you really got the nub of the issue.
Nice.
So the way that I kind of see the dialectic is that, like, the credence firster says beliefs are just high credences, and then, like, you could say, well, but, like, couldn't Taylor believe that P but have a low credence to P?
Yeah.
And if you just leave it at that, then the credence firster is just going to say no. Right? And, like, why should I think that? I'm a credence firster, right?
Yeah.
And then you might say, oh, well, here's a way I can tell the story to make it plausible. Like, there's a case of epistemic akrasia, right?
Yeah.
And then if we, like, kind of independently think that those things are possible,
Yeah.
then, like, that might be a reason to think, oh, this case is possible.
Yeah.
But then I think I agree with Andrew that the fact that she thinks it's unlikely that her family and friends don't love her, doesn't yet get us to she's not confident, or she's confident that they don't love her. Sorry.
Wait, can you say that one more time? Sorry.
The fact that she thinks it's unlikely that P doesn't get us to she has a low confidence in P.
Yeah, but like you're gonna have to say that about
You just say that about so many
right,
things.
Yeah, Andrew would like that with that inference, but yeah.
Okay, we're not claiming that across the board every time
Right.
you have a belief that something's unlikely, you have a low confidence level in
Right.
it.
Yeah.
But to say in every case like this,
Yeah.
you just have this belief that it's unlikely, but you
Yeah.
never have the low credence. I mean, that's where we think like, that's a pretty easy move to make. I don't know.
So I guess like what Peter said in the reply was something like, well, like usually, and this is true. Like usually, your probabilistic judgments are a good guide to your confidence, even if that's not universally true. But this is already a weird case, right? Like we're not dealing with a normal case here. We're dealing with a case of epistemic akrasia. And so it seems like there's going to be a place where they're going to come apart. Like this is going to be it.
But
Yeah, no, I mean, so I think do you think that like the Blue Bus Company cases are any less weird? Because I feel like we could say the same thing there, where you think it's unlikely that the Blue Bus Company hit someone, and like on account of thinking that it's unlikely, you thereby like modulate what your credence is.
That would be the normal case, but that wouldn't be a case of crazy.
Right. Yeah. But then we can just add on top of that you have like independent perceptual justification for a belief that the Blue Bus Company hit someone, and there it seems structurally. Oh, okay.
so
You shouldn't believe it. That's it. It's the Matrix fallacy.
So, okay, the thought is supposed to be, at least to me, it seems like a cost to a credence first view, that you can never believe something and have low confidence in it. And it's really weird to me to think you could believe it and think it's unlikely, but you can never have a low confidence in it. To me, thinking it's unlikely, that's like just so close to having low confidence in it. It seems like it's very easy to slip from one to the other.
Yeah.
Of course, this is a way they can push back, and that's why I think I wanted our thesis to be like it supports dualism over. I mean, I don't think it's like a knockdown. It's not like a knockdown proof against a credence first view, but so maybe one interesting thing is like, look, credence firsters are going to have to deny the possibility of these cases. That I think like reflecting on, and reflecting on kind of like a lot of especially cases where like you have like. You're jealous, you think your spouse might be cheating, like you believe they aren't, but you also have a low credence. When you think about especially like emotionally loaded cases, it seems like we can get a lot of cases like these going, and you're gonna have to deny in all those cases that you could ever have a low
I
credence.
think you need to do some experimental philosophy. You need to ask some people about with diachronic beliefs.
I asked Liz, is that enough? I asked Liz and she asked me, is that enough?
Yeah, that's the great thing about co-authoring. You got like the XFI going right here. Yeah, that's a way they can push back though, and we acknowledge that. So, yeah.
So the one thing I had trouble with is,
understanding exactly what you think is the plausible set of attitudes to ascribe to, is it Taylor?
Taylor, yeah.
So here are two combinations of attitudes that you could ascribe to Taylor. Believing P, having low credence to P. Another combination would be believing P and being pretty confident that the evidence doesn't support P. So the second one is an actual case of akrasia.
Mm-hmm.
First one is not. And I take it that the trouble case for the lock-in or the credence first is the first combination,
Mhm.
not the second one.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think probably, well, I mean, in a way it's terminological, but probably I would prefer it that you focused on that combination and didn't talk about epistemic akrasia. Okay, so the first combination, is that a problem really for the credence first? Well, you could say it's a problem if the person has to believe that P, has low credence at P, and that's it, no other attitude. But it's not clear to me that that's, I mean, so you could say, well, it's not clear that that's the right set of attitudes. Here's another set of attitudes you could describe to Taylor. Believing P, being confident that P, believing that P, and being confident that P is false.
And the third thing's just one big attitude?
Huh?
Is the third thing just one big
No,
attitude?
this would be two belief
Okay.
attitudes and two credence attitudes.
Okay.
And you would say, oh, if that's possible, then it just means that we can have contradictory beliefs. Credence first is not, committed to ruling that out as impossible necessarily. And so I feel like in order for you to make a case, you have to somehow convince the credence first that the person has to believe the P and the low credence at P, and that's it. Nothing else is going on. No other attitudes there. And maybe you have maybe you think that's right, but it's not really true. At least
I think this is related to the objection. Is it related to the objection we consider?
The second one?
Or just the one, the section 4.
Where the credence first is going to say that, oh, you just have two different credences, one high and one low.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but just like, so for example, the response 2, you say, that would mean that, you believe both P and not P, but that's not being Socratic.
And your
But
thought is
that's
this Socratic's not.
That's just not, yeah, that's just not. So
I
anyway,
see,
I
yeah.
feel like the thing I'm not real, like in order to really see the force of the argument, I would like it to be like pretty intuitive that there is a belief that P, there's a low credence,
I see.
and that's it. There's not.
There's no other attitudes.
Because like a credence, like someone who's inclined to the credence first view would probably, like that's the way I'm typically inclined, is to say, whenever you ascribe a low credence at P, very low, sufficiently low, you basically already said that the person disbelieves P. Like, so it's sort of, it's hard for me in my head, at least intuitively, to take those apart and say, oh no, this is a case where it's a low confidence in P, but there's no belief that that P.
So
maybe you have a better grip on these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of related to the objection that we consider, and maybe what you're kind of doing is pushing back on some of the responses we're giving and saying, I'm not sure those are like quite as convincing as you might think. I mean, I still think it's weird to think you can both have a high credence in P and a low credence in P at the same time.
Yeah,
but I think you're.
The credence first can just say, well, it just means that the case is possible.
Well, okay, so, I mean, let me respond to maybe something else you said. So you were saying, you want to be convinced that those are the only two attitudes of the case.
Yeah.
But the way it strikes me is that it actually doesn't make much of a difference if those are the only two attitudes in the case. I think as long as even if there's plenty of attitudes in the case, as long as one of the credences is just a low credence in P, then I think we can generate the case. I mean, so for instance, like, it's plausible, I think, that like Andrew's right, that like one of the attitudes involved in the case is a high credence that P is irrational. But then I think alongside that, you're also going to have a credence that like P is unlikely given the evidence, and then because of that, you're going to assign a low credence to P. You might even have, like, because you're behaving Socratically, you might even have a low all things considered evidence, or you might have a low all things considered credence to that P. I think that's a little less likely. I think what's more likely is that you just have like this really complicated set of attitudes, and like eventually it spits out that you have a low credence in P. And I think as long as somewhere in the case, even if there's lots of other attitudes involved, as soon as there's a low credence in P, we can get the sort of argument that we want.
Well, should we not allow another?
We can talk about
Yeah.
that. Because I don't think
We can't say though that you can like
Yeah.
the problem's going to be is if you do say you have a high credence in P and a low credence in P at the same time, that I think will be a way for the credence first to get around it. But I agree with Peter that there can be a ton of other attitudes going on in the background about your beliefs about your evidence, your beliefs about your beliefs, whatever.
That's not what
So
Oh, okay.
okay.
Yeah,
Well, we
sorry.
should talk
I
more
misunderstood.
after. I think yeah.
So, is the 2 o'clock session here?
Yes.
We have like 4 minutes left. Do you?
I'm fine.
Okay. Quick.
Okay, great. So I have what might be a boneheaded outsider's question. So even if dualism better explains what it says here, it could be that the credence first or belief first views have assets dualism lacks, and so overall.
I see. Yeah.
One thing that stands out to me, as an outsider, is credence first, belief first, dualism. None of them talk about rationality. They just talk about relations between attitudes.
Yep. For
But
sure.
Credence first and belief first give elegant, simple stories about how they relate. We can just read off from the one what's rational with this kind of attitude, what's rational there, and here's an explanation for why, because this is more fundamental than that.
Good.
With dualism, you don't have that kind of story, or at least if you're going to say that there's a kind of match with rational attitudes, you don't have an explanation as to why. So with dualism, I don't see it seems to lack that asset. What do you think of that?
I think you've written on this, so you should.
I actually think that belief and credence can even rationally come apart quite a bit, and I actually so I would turn this on its head and be like, that's actually a really nice feature of dualism because it can explain why So one common case that Peter sort of alluded to is a case where you get a lot of statistical evidence that some proposition is true. A lot of people think you should still withhold belief about the truth of that proposition, but nonetheless raise your credence a lot. If I have a bunch of statistical evidence that you committed some crime, I shouldn't believe that you committed it on that basis, but I should have a high credence that you committed it. And then once you get these cases going, you can start to generate other cases where belief and credence actually rationally come apart quite a bit. And so then, again, someone could say this is crazy, I don't buy any of this, no. So I think this is a great question. I think it can go both ways depending on kind of how independent you want the attitudes to be rationally and descriptively. So, thanks.